The abolition of slavery worldwide is far from complete. Despite international and domestic laws against the practice of slavery, there are now some 27 million people living as slaves. More than 9 of the 27 million are children. Every year, vast numbers of human beings are trafficked both internationally and within national borders. In fact, it is now cheaper to purchase a slave than it has ever been at any point in human history. The recent earthquake in Haiti has brought the slave trade back into the focus of the mainstream media, but the sad truth is that long before the earthquake, the children of Haiti could be purchased for as little as $50 US. Human trafficking has become a multi-billion-dollar business and is the third largest generator of illegal revenue after drugs and illegal arms dealing. The FBI estimates that $9.5 billion is generated by the slave trade every year. The International Labor Office stated in a report entitled Global Alliance Against Forced Labor, the figure is closer to $32 billion. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, 800,000 people are trafficked each year across international borders. Approximately 17,500 new victims are trafficked across U.S. borders. 30,000 more human beings are trafficked through the USA on their way to international destinations. Men, women, and children in particular, in every country are being defrauded, manipulated, or simply kidnapped and sold into slavery, even in the wealthiest nations. In impoverished nations, debt slavery has become a cultural epidemic. Many people are forced to work off debts their whole lives, debts which can never be repaid due to ever-increasing interest rates and additional charges imposed. Some are even forced to give their children to the lender to work off their debts. Others in impoverished areas sometimes even resort to selling their children due to the desperation of their economic situation. Often young women and children of both sexes seeking a better life are taken by people who promise them work or scholarships. Instead of paid work or schooling, the victims arrive, usually in foreign countries, to find they are slaves, the majority of whom will be forced to work in the sex industry. Like all multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprises, slavery thrives in part due to the fact that there are always government officials willing to turn a blind eye or even sanction slavery for the right payoff. Forms of government-sanctioned slavery are even endorsed in major Western countries like the United States of America. The guest worker program has repeatedly been accused of human rights abuses, including fraud and human trafficking. Congressman Charles Rangel stated that the guest worker program was the closest thing I have ever seen to slavery. The reality is, if something looks like slavery and smells like slavery, it is slavery. Allegations of human trafficking and pederasty in conjunction with U.S. government officials were uncovered by former Senator John DeCamp during his investigation into the Franklin banking scandal. Much of what he uncovered is recorded in his book, The Franklin Cover-Up: Child Abuse, Satanism, and Murder in Nebraska. A documentary film called Conspiracy of Silence also discloses much of the same information. This documentary was scheduled to be aired on the Discovery Channel in May of 1994. It was canceled due to congressional pressure on the cable network. Sex slavery, including pederasty, goes on all over the world, and not just in Thailand or South America or other places infamous for it. When slavery is exposed in the mainstream media, it usually revolves around the sex industry. Although sex slavery is pervasive and truly abominable, it must not be overlooked that there are many slaves who do all sorts of labor. Slaves and forced child labor are responsible, in part or in full, for the manufacture of many common items, including clothing, toys, household items, jewelry, and even the food we eat, to name a few. The people who benefit most from slavery and child labor are often the large multinational corporations and their owners. The chocolate industry is a classic example of this. Cocoa buyers purchase crops from isolated farmers using slave labor for well below market value. This ensures that the impoverished farmers will continue to be unable to hire workers, and so the practice of slave labor continues. This practice deflates the cost of cocoa on the world market, and farmers who pay their labor cannot compete. The major food corporations who own the biggest chocolate companies make huge profits internationally. Meanwhile, the men, women, and children of the Ivory Coast and neighboring nations suffer. The Harkin-Engel Protocol, which was aimed only at child slavery and endorsed by the Ivory Coast government, has done little good and does not even address the adults being enslaved. The harsh reality is that debt slavery is a fate which will befall us all if we permit our governments to continue the practice of borrowing and spending money willy-nilly in order to pay for their wars of foreign aggression, as well as wars internally against their own citizens. The governments of the world have mired their people in debts so huge it is impossible to pay them. The Grace Commission back in 1983 determined that in America alone, all the federal income tax collected went only to pay the interest on the national debt, which means not a single cent paid by the American people in federal taxes is used to pay for any sort of infrastructure or governmental programs, including the billions spent on the military. Instead, more money is borrowed from the Fed, contributing to an ever-increasing national debt and the interest owed on that debt. Citizens of prosperous Western nations pay as much as 1/3 to half their income in taxes, much of which is used to support policies which many do not even endorse. At what percentage does taxation become a form of slavery? The global economic condition continues to deteriorate as wars, both international and civil, rage all over the planet. Pervasive war and poverty have created an almost endless supply of victims for the world slave trade. Today, abolitionists are needed more than ever. The victims of slavery need more than liberation. They need help repairing devastated lives once they have been freed. It is time for the people of the world to hold governments, corporations, and everyone who benefits from the proliferation of the global slave trade accountable. We can all get involved in helping ending slavery in small ways on a daily basis by being more vigilant with regard to what we buy. Every time someone buys an item for less than the cost of its component parts, slave labor has undoubtedly been employed. I would rather pay more, own less, and be certain everyone involved in making the goods I buy and growing the food I eat are free persons who are well paid for their labor.